Chapter 2. Again, I want to remind anyone taking the time to listen to my true story. Dead people saved my life. Question is why? This is October 5th, approximately, 1986. The exact date I don't know because of the circumstances were too traumatizing, and I don't have the hospital records. I lay there in that hospital bed, what seemed like an eternity, excruciating pain firing through every molecule, paralyzed, unable to move. I lay in the dark, semi-catatonic, tears streaming down my cheeks, wanting to die. When suddenly I had a vision. He looked familiar, but at first I was too sick to recognize what it was. I thought I was hallucinating, and then he called my name. It was Bob, my fiancé that had died, October 1960. It was Bob. Trudi, get out of bed. Crawl if you must. There will be a long-distance call for you, and you must make sure you take that call, he told me. I did as he instructed. He encouraged me to roll off the bed since I could no longer walk, and slowly to the floor. Every move such agony I cannot describe. There are no words to describe that kind of pain. Like lightning firing through every molecule of my body. And I crawled into the hall and up to the desk with the nurses on my hands and knees, and those evil witches taunted and teased me, calling me names. At which point rage went through me like a volcano and my voice returned. Yes, rage triggers adrenaline, and you'd be amazed what you can do in rage. I screamed at them and cursed them, saying, "You give me my long-distance call right now, or you witches will see jail time. I'm here illegally. Get me to my damn feet, or what happened to those nurses at Toronto General will look like a picnic when my lawyers get through with you." It was a ruse. I knew the lawyers wouldn't help me, nor would the police, but they didn't know that. And yes, there were serious repercussions at the Toronto General Hospital when the nurses were responsible for some deaths through negligence. The look of shock and fear on their faces as one said, "How could she know there's a call for her?" as the telephone rang. It was another miracle. Yes, rage got me to my feet. And they handed me the phone. Elizabeth, one of my real estate loyal clients, had a vision herself. She knew my mother was somehow involved in doing me harm. Yes, I started to tell her what my mother had done and Dr. Lynch had done, and I was babbling. And finally she just said to me, "Trudi, shut up, this is not going to help." She said she called my mother, and my mother lied and said I was in perfectly good hands, and Elizabeth knew that wasn't true, and my mother wouldn't tell her where I was, so she just called every hospital in Sudbury and found me. She also told me that she called Barbara Frum of the CBC wanting her to do a story on me, but Barbara said she'd done one on a woman like me in Barrie, who was housebound, and her ratings went down. But if I died, I'd be a story. Oh, how I cursed that woman. Silently to myself. Then I came to my sentence and played a role as if on stage. Oh, so Barbara Frum of the CBC is going to do a story on what they're doing to me here. And if I'm not immediately released, she's sending her crew with cameras, and those witches will all wind up in court along with Dr. Keene and Dr. Lynch. Oh, sounds great. Okay. I'm leaving right now, and I'll call you when I get home. And if you don't hear from me in 1 hour, call the police and start having them charged. Elizabeth, frankly, wasn't making any sense because she didn't catch on right away. But that's okay. Finally, she said, "Okay, I get it." I said, "I'll call you when I get home." And I hung up. Well, they released me darn quick. And that one caring nurse gathered my things, helped me get dressed, and wheeled me out to the lobby and dialed Tom Murphy's phone number for me. He answered immediately. He said he knew all along they were trying to kill me, cursing my mother. He picked me up and drove me straight to Wasaga Beach to get me as far away from Sudbury, Ontario as possible. And from there we called friends in Brantford who promised to help me. So Tom drove me there. They were very religious people who worked in the hospital in Kitchener, Ontario. And I completely adored them and loved them and trusted them. Once I got there and Tom left, to my horror, I discovered the truth. Instead of trying to get me medical help, he was trying to get me back to work so I would make money. That's all anybody ever cared about. Get the bitch to work. Make money. Well, I would if I could. But I tried to explain to them, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you crazy?" Tom had already left. I was dumbfounded. How stupid could they be? And they made an appointment for me for an interview the next day. Can you believe it? Yeah, as a secretary. Anyway, I can't even write, and I can't walk, and I can't read, and how in the hell am I supposed to work in this condition? But cold as ice, Alan Dove just said, "Oh, we'll talk about it in the morning. You'll be fine." He was in complete denial. He hadn't listened to anything I'd said to him or what Tom said to him. He just completely ignored it all. He asked the children to help me go up the stairs to bed. It was their bedrooms were in the attic. Two, one under each arm for support, helped me shuffle to stairs, and from there in agony, I crawled up those stairs on my hands and knees. And truthfully, the children were saying things to me like they understood. The older ones certainly didn't understand what was wrong with their father or their mother, trying to put me to work. They had seen me sick so many times before, and they knew this was serious. Anyway, they helped me onto the bed, and I lay in my clothes. And I looked up at the ceiling, and to my horror, I realized, my God, the insulation is hanging loose. That's toxic. It will cause cancer to the children. And the roof was full of mold. I knew how insane Alan was. Completely insane. I knew I had to get out and phone Tom and get me out. But there was no way. So again, I just lay back waiting to die. And just then, another vision came towards me through the roof. And Trudi, "It's me, Bob." Well, I recognized him right away this time. "I love you. Get up. You must get up. You cannot die. You have work to do. You must save these children. They are being poisoned." I whispered, not wanting to wake the children. "Bob, is that you, Bob?" "Yes, it's me. Now get up." "You have to help me. I can't move," I cried. He replied, "I can't do that. You have to do it yourself. I will stay with you, but you can do it." Yes. The flashbacks came that afternoon. He'd picked me up on his motorcycle and driven to Moonlight Beach, our special place for picnics. He sat me down on a small hill overlooking the water and told me we would not be married because he was going to die soon, and explained I had to research my disease. That was October 1960. And here it was, 1986. And I hadn't done any of the things that he'd asked me to do that afternoon. And he warned me about my mother in Sudbury. And he told me to stay the hell out of Sudbury and get away from my mother. That she's sick. He said I'd be able to deal with my father's violence because that's obvious, but you'll never be able to handle your mother. As I struggled to get to my feet, it all came back to me in flashbacks. His warning. This is very painful for me to talk about it. He went on to tell me that my mother had always been my child. She'd never really been a mother, and she was never going to be a mother. And he went on to tell me a horrifying story for the next many decades of my entire life, most of which in trauma I don't remember. I just sat frozen, listening to what my life was going to be like. It was brutal, and I was in a state of shock. The last thing he said was that my research into my disease would save millions of children 200 years from now, as they will all be born like me. And later that night we went to friends for the evening, and then he whispered to me, "Trudy, do you mind if I leave here for a while? I want to go for a drive and clear my head." I thought he meant he had a headache, and I said, "Okay, go, it's okay." And he gave me a light kiss and left. Our relationship had been celibate. He knew about the rapes and wanted to give me back my virginity so that we would stay celibate and have sex for the first time only on our wedding night. It was his special gift to me, and his way of proving to me that he loved me for me, not my body. I always felt safe with Bob. But after hours, when Bob did not return, one of his friends drove me home. I went to bed reading so I could fall asleep. I wasn't even the least bit worried. And the next morning I got a call telling me that Bob was dead. He'd been found by the police on the road, his body in a ditch, decapitated. 40 feet beyond, they found his bleeding head. In those days, barbed wire fences were common. I think they've since been banned. The shock was traumatic. I remembered nothing of the previous afternoon conversation. My brain blocked it all out. I know I attended his funeral in a daze, and I don't remember anything after that for months. I don't remember meeting anyone in his family or if they knew about me. I was just so traumatized by his death, I stopped caring about life for a very long time. I know I tried to drink myself to death, and a young man rescued me, but I frankly never fully recovered. Everything came flooding back like watching a movie or a dream, except I knew I was not dreaming, or was I? I could see and hear him. It was real. Yes, it was Bob. I begged him to help me. "You'll be okay. I love you," he said. "I'm going to lead you to a place where someone will come to help you. He is on his way." "He will help you survive. If you don't go, you will die, but you're not meant to die now. You must get up. I love you. Now roll off the bed and crawl. You can crawl like you did before at the hospital. Someone is coming to help you, and I will lead you there." Slowly I did as Bob told me to do, and he hovered above me like in a mist and kept talking to me to keep me going, keep me from passing out. Every second, every inch was unbearable agony, crawling slowly as he kept talking to me and telling me he loved me and someone was coming to help me. And so slowly I made it down the stairs, through the living room, the kitchen, pulled myself up to my feet by the door handle, to the hall. I dressed slowly, in agony. Unbearable, excruciating pain with every movement had me drowning in mind-boggling pain. Fortunately, Tom had made sure I'd be warm. He dressed me for the trip. I wore my down-filled purple coat, fox hat, muff, and wool mittens, slowly opening the door. I slipped into my boots. I didn't do them up, I just slopped into them. And choking back tears, shuffled my way outside. There was a bright moon that night, and once I hit the cold October chilly air, it felt lovely as the wind whipped around my cheeks, as if the loving caresses were from Bob. He stayed with me every agonizing step of the way. I slowly shuffled, choking, coughing, and then stopping so I could breathe, heart racing, throbbing lungs heaving in pain, stabbing like being hit with a sword, knifing me over and over again, like lightning, excruciating pain. Bob kept me calm. He had me stop several times to breathe. Breathe in slow, he'd say. Count. Breathe in slow. And I would say left foot forward and move the left foot. Right foot forward and move the right foot. And he just kept hovering there above me, leading me the way until what seemed like forever. I don't know how long it was, and I don't know how far away it was. It could have been 3 blocks, it could have been miles, I don't know. And when I saw the sign of a donut shop, Bob said, "There, that is where you must go. It is not far now, keep moving." And I pushed one leg at a time. I shuffled forward, each agonizing step. When I got to the door, I couldn't open it. And again, I asked Bob to help me. And again, he repeated he didn't have that power. He told me to scream for help, which I did. And a man rushed to open the door for me. And just then, as the door opened, Bob's image slowly vanished into the night's dark sky, his last words to me promising me help would come, and then I was ordered to stay there until the help arrived. I ordered coffee and told everything that had happened to me, what Dr. Lynch did, what the Sudbury Hospital did. I told them my whole story, and people were fascinated, and they sat there, and each person, instead of leaving, they were cab drivers, they were tractor-trailer truck drivers. Instead of leaving, they stayed. They wanted to see who was this mysterious person that was coming to help me. The fact that I had been led there by a dead man, they wanted to see if it was really true. They were witnessing a miracle. So, of course, they weren't going to leave. I don't know how long I waited. Then suddenly, a very tall, young, handsome policeman in uniform walked in and said, "Is there anyone here that is sick and needs help?" And before I could speak, everybody in the shop said, "Yes, her," and pointed to me. He sat down next to me, and he explained to me how I had to wean off the Benadryl safely. I didn't even ask him how he knew that I was now addicted to Benadryl. And then slowly we talked for a long time, and he shared with me his story about his dead brother who had died due to similar medical negligence like mine. And he said that he had not believed his brother, who begged him for help, trusting the doctors. And after he died, he regretted it. So he began to research outside of Canada, in the United States. And he discovered the term chemical hypersensitivities was rampant. And hundreds of thousands of people were suffering all over the United States. The difference is that some of them were getting legal recognition. None of them were getting any recognition in Canada. We were just left to die. And the doctors were killing us. And he said we were being systemically poisoned, each generation getting worse. I told him that as far as I knew, I wasn't born with it. And he said, maybe not, but they are being born with it now because their parents are so badly poisoned. And he explained to me that he had no cure for me, but that after his brother died, he began to research with American agencies, and they had all kinds of science that Health Canada was ignoring. I screeched in a fury. I went completely hysterical, screaming, murderers, Health Canada are murderers. I could have been diagnosed decades ago. I could have danced on Broadway. I could still have my houses in Toronto. They destroyed my life. They're murderers. I shook with rage. And everyone in the shop all came over me and said they would pray for me to live. After hearing my story, they all gave me a hug. And now the policeman's brother was killed by the same kind of treatment as me, and they all agreed, and they said, yes, Health Canada are murderers, and they are killing us by withholding the truth. And the policeman said once more, yes, they murdered my brother. And he described how he got to me. He said that after finding out the truth of what killed his brother, he began to pray that God send him one person to help. If he could not save his brother, if he could just save one other person, he would not feel so sick about not helping his brother. His guilt was ruining his life. And he was driving on duty his car in Mississauga when his brother came to him in a similar vision as mine. His brother hovered above the hood of his car and directed him to drive and led him all the way to me here in Brantford, Ontario, in this little coffee shop. And yes, we have all those witnesses. It's true. Dead people saved my life. The policeman called Tom for me and left me without giving me his name, and I never heard from him again. Often wondered about that. So many people that I helped or stepped in to help me would be there for a moment and then gone. And I'd be left alone all over again. I don't understand that kind of help. I don't understand how he could just walk away and forget about it. But he did. I waited for Tom to come and pick me up. And then slowly the men all left, and they said they would continue to pray for me. Tom drove me back to my cabin. Despite that I was terminal, Tom was forced to leave me for work, giving me Dan's Wilson gas mask. It was rubber, so that I could breathe. It was not a good seal, and the activated filters were yellow and purple and not powerful enough, so we doubled the filters. That was the one thing the policeman said. I had to get into a gas mask, that I couldn't breathe the Earth's atmosphere. It was heavy and gave my face a huge red welt, but it was better than nothing. It would keep me alive so that I could research to find a way to reverse or control this disease. After hearing my story in a coffee shop in Wasaga, there's a lot that's I don't remember. I did slowly wean off the Benadryl, one day at a time. I know that I shuffled along the beach because a man told me that Dr. Cowan was not just a doctor, but a forensic scientist, and that I should go see him. 5 coffees later, loaded with caffeine, I shuffled. I don't know how many miles away it was. I wasn't well enough to drive safely, so I walked. But the cold wind whipping off Georgian Bay always took the pain down. I think it took me almost all day to get there. In fact, when I arrived, Dr. Cowan was waiting for me. It seems that that man who overheard my story in the coffee shop in Wasaga drove there and told him about me and said I would be coming to see him. In fact, the office was supposed to be closed, but he waited, and we talked for a long time, and I told him everything. And yes, he understood the term chemical hypersensitivities, because he wasn't just a doctor, he was a forensic scientist, and it made sense to him. And he said to me, I promise you, I don't know what we can do, but I will help you with your research. And I promise you, I will do you no harm. I'll make sure you don't get any drugs. And I was no longer on welfare. I was on disability thanks to the Premier of Ontario, David Peterson. Now there's another example of somebody who stepped into my life for 15 seconds and disappeared. I don't know why. I've never done that to anybody. I've never stepped in and helped somebody and just walked away. Always tried to keep in touch and always tried to help them, and always made sure that I never changed my last name completely so that I could be found. But nobody ever tried to find me. For a while, it wasn't bad. Mr. Mack, who was a biochemist from Japan, he helped me with the research. Tom donated over $20,000 to help me send out letters and flyers to get media support and help pay for the long-distance phone calls I made to the agencies in the United States. And everyone that I called, they sent me research. And I'm not going to list them all here. I've done that on my website. But most important was the NIOSH Department of Chemical Hazards and Fred Nelson. And the women at the Collingwood Library helped me, giving me whatever they could find. I could not have survived without their assistance. I couldn't write properly. So they became like my secretaries when they weren't busy, and they would write letters, and we sent them out to agencies coast to coast, England and Europe. I got a truckload of research on the environment, fish and animals, but frankly nothing that was of any use except to discover that our fish already have cancer tumors from the pesticides. We spray our forests with pesticides. The Ministry of Environment cooperated by contacting me personally and letting me know when they would be spraying and making sure I didn't go anywhere near that forest or that area during their spraying time. The compassion of the district of Wasaga Beach, Barrie, Georgian Bay, and Collingwood is astounding compared to the prejudice and cruelty against me in Sudbury, being as insanely violent as an animal with rabies. Maybe their excuse is they're so poisoned that they're no longer sane, no longer capable of being sane. Because their violence isn't necessarily physical. It's like my mother's violence. Because it's violent what my mother did to me. And it's violent what those doctors did to me. And it's violent what the welfare did to me. Yes, it's all violence. There's many degrees of violence. And the mental cruelty is the most evil of all. Cursing at me and spitting at me. Calling me names. Never got that in Georgian Bay. Police wouldn't help me with all of the evil that was done to me in Sudbury. Every policeman in Collingwood and Wasaga Beach and Barrie and OPP and RCMP, you name it, they all did what they could to help me. They went above and beyond the call of duty. So many unbelievable stories of what they did. The police chief in Collingwood sent a young man to fight bats when my apartment in Collingwood got invaded with bats in the porch. It wasn't part of his job. That's the kind of people they were. Never saw that in Sudbury. Since 1987, I choose to reclaim the right to my body and decide what medical care I deserve. That was Dr. Cowan, who urged me to do that and make sure that I never get another family doctor outside of him. And I made sure that I don't. And he said, if you ever wind up in a hospital in Sudbury again, make sure you have no family doctor. Because that way you can control what they do to you. They have to get your permission. And he helped me understand our laws in Canada. Once I have a family doctor, the family doctor's got a whole lot of power over my body. So I use clinics. And I'll search a clinic. And I'll walk out if a doctor is not cooperative and doesn't understand about chemical sensitivities. I just walk out. Until I find somebody that has any compassion and understanding wherever I am. And that's how I survive. I use hospital and clinics when I need to, but they don't get the right to do with me and my life as they choose. And then one day I got a call from an American scientist in Collingwood, and I should come to a meeting. And after this meeting, he helped me understanding our toxic world. And from there, I went to Dr. Dean, Carolyn Dean. She tried to help me. She went to TVO. I warned her not to go public to the media at this time. I didn't have enough evidence. They attacked her. They started to send in accountants looking for any way to take her license from her. That's what the Ontario Medical Association did. So I begged her, get out of Canada, go to New York. I gave her what research I had, and I said, you'll be able to help Americans. But here, they will destroy your life as they did me. And she did. And just like that policeman, she never followed up if I was alive or dead. Interesting. I don't know. Strange attitude people have. I mean, at the very least, you'd think she'd call and say, hey, Trudi, you still alive? Nope. I got a call from Dr. Jaffe at the National Institute of Drug Abuse. He checked on me a couple of times. He sent me right on the phone. He spent a long time explaining to me about addiction to nicotine and cigarettes. I was in a gas mask, and I was so addicted to cigarettes that I was hallucinating when I tried to go off. I didn't become allergic to cigarettes until maybe 12, 15 years later. But I got off them. And it was painful. But he helped me wean off. And for 3 years, the children, I have to talk about the children, Jason and Timmy and Cassandra. They believed me that I was researching to save their life and their children's lives. 6 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, they understood what not one adult understood. Unbelievable. The brilliance and compassion of children. I hate Canada. I despise this country. But I love their children. For they're not born evil. Well, actually, that's not true. I did meet a 3-year-old that was born evil, a sociopath, and he tried to kill his baby sister. And I helped the mother understand that he was born with a brain disorder, and that he was dangerous, and he always would be. And I helped them in how to train him the way you would a mad dog. And it's not easy, but he was trainable. You couldn't use the normal way of punishment because he would quickly adapt to that. What you had to do with him was figure out what he loved most. And his only real attachment was to his father. He felt nothing for his mother. He did not bond with his mother or his grandmother. And he hated being with either one. And he couldn't bear to be separated from the father. So I said, okay, that's what you do. Every time he acts out, you separate him from the father. And slowly, and we kept in touch for over a year and a half, 2 years, and he became trainable. He would never be what you would call a good person, but he understood the rules, and he knew the difference from right and wrong. And he was now so trained that he didn't dare do anything criminal or bad behavior. And he bonded with me. I don't know why, but we bonded. So sometimes, to give his parents a break, I would babysit him. And then slowly I got him to bond with his grandmother. I think the problem between him and his mother was that he was so bonded to his father that he was jealous of his mother, because his father obviously loved his mother, and he instinctively knew that. So that's kind of an interesting side thing that happened while I was researching brain damage and disease from toxic chemicals. But those children rallied round me in that shack. And yes, I was left to die in a shack in Wasaga Beach by my parents and family and so-called friends. But I had the children, and I had the police through the whole of Georgian Bay. Unbelievable. And I had members of AA, and I had a military man. So I had kind of a new family. And those children would come over to the shack and give me a hug before school, and come back to the shack and give me a hug and sit with me after school, and ask me to write a little book for them on what research I found and why pine trees were toxic and maple trees weren't. And I don't have a copy of that book, but I did do one for them. And any time I got discouraged and I was in terrible pain and I took an attack, they'd say, they would remind me, you're doing it for us, Trudi. Don't give up. You're doing it for us. And I include some of their pictures in this on YouTube in this chapter too. Jason was really remarkable. He used to make me laugh. I took an attack. My father had been down, and he was very good at causing oil and gas and diesel fumes without warning me. He was such a monster. And my mother was so stupid, she would just stand back and not do anything about it. But anyway, I took an attack, and he helped me get dressed. And he's 6 years old. And I needed to get to the coffee shop, so he helped me to the car. The one thing about my attacks is that I could drive. It's just my legs. I had gotten enough research that I was able to detox enough that I had some actually good days. and I was slowly relearning how to write. Not very good at this point, but I was slowly relearning. And I started for the car, and then I just sat down. The pain just shot through me like lightning, and the tears streamed down my face, and he hugged me. And as he sat there with me, hugging me, he said to me, "Oh, Trudi, I love you so much. I'd give you one of my legs if I could, but they're too short for you." I burst into laughter. Have to love the children. So yes, they kept me going. This went on year after year. Then finally, I got an article in 1988. And Timmy, one more person, every day he chopped wood for me. He put it in a wood stove. He helped me to the outhouse that was 40 feet away from the shack. The shack had no running water and no washroom. And he did that for 3 years, every day. Very special time. And I will cut this off now. Chapter 3 will be 1988 and the media article. "1988. I got an incredible article in the Collingwood newspaper, very detailed, that covered all the research and the story. It was really well written by Leslie Budge. The editor assigned her to me because I simply couldn't write. So she spent time with me, and she looked over all my research, and it was a great story. And I had so much hope. I'd been in AA and ACE, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and I really thought that I could connect all the victims together, and we could help each other and share with each other. And united, we might conquer the medical abuse that we were all suffering from. And as it turned out, in that sense it worked. I got phone calls from all over the place, and the victims were everywhere. There was a woman in Barrie that the CBC had covered at her, and they didn't give her any help at all. I talked to her mother. She was just on basic welfare. She was housebound. I was in a gas mask, but at least I could get outside, and I could drive, and I could type, and I could research, and I was a functional human being. All right, I was a cripple, and I was in pain, but, I was far from perfect, but I wasn't. I was no longer terminal. There was hope for me, and there was hope for people like me. And I had an early system. I called it the snowflake system. I got a woman off welfare. She became an engineer. Yeah, like the policeman. Thanks, Trudi, and boom, off she went. Never heard from her again. I saved the life of a woman's daughter. I think she was about 5 years old. I went into the place and I said, "Oh my God," and I could immediately identify what was affecting the daughter, And the same with the woman in where was that woman? Oh, she was in Chelmsford. Anyway, oil, gas, diesel, perfumes, air fresheners, bleaches, ammonia, kitchen soap. All this stuff had to go. Get it out. Throw it in out. If not throw it out, put it out in a shed somewhere where it won't poison, and get everything out of the house. And if there was mold, that had to be dealt with. And you had to do it professionally. There was a man who suffered from mold. He didn't know it was mold, but it was mold. And the mold was in the basement, and it was coming up through the air vents. Anyway, make a long story short, I got a phone call from Dr. Stephen Levine. He was a victim. National Centers for Disease Control. Mrs. Graham of the Washington Post took my research, and she said she would keep it for me in case I died. I could just go on and on and on. And although I couldn't cure anybody, I was able to make their life more tolerable. But and the National Department of Chemical Hazards, I was looking for a way to reverse the brain damage. And I knew that's what Bob told me I had to do. So, you know, it had been by divine intervention that I knew I had to do that. So I kind of knew where I was going with my research. And obviously it was detox. Well, the NIOSH Department of Chemical Hazards sent me their handbook, and I talked to them directly, and the scientists. And I tried everything in there, and it had very specific, like milk was for certain toxic chemicals. Oil-based chemicals were different than other kinds of chemicals, and airborne chemicals, and they go into your lungs. And anyway, make a long story short, and it's very scientific, nothing worked. Now, mistletoe had been used for centuries for alcoholics, and I did stay on that. And it was beneficial, but it didn't control it. It didn't cure the brain damage. I still couldn't. I could read now, and I had memory, and I could comprehend, but I couldn't write. So from there, I discovered the lies. That the doctors were trained as a society not to know that we were being poisoned. Governments made sure of that, otherwise they would be forced to stop poisoning us. Industry would be forced to stop. Monsanto and Bayer would be put out of business, and all pesticide spraying banned, and all vehicles spewing gas, oil, and diesel into our atmosphere, and would have to be recycled and throw out nothing but clean air. And guess what? That technology is available. But there's no demand for it because the governments won't bring in the laws to stop us being poisoned. And the thing is that our medical system is making money off our being poisoned and getting cancer. We've created a whole industry. That's exactly what the Nazis had in mind. And they succeeded. And I was still using the name Marie, so in this article you will see the name Marie. But I was unable to get what I thought I was going to get. It became very clear. Oh, I got to tell you about one victim. One wealthy woman and her husband, they built a $350,000 environmentally protected non-toxic home. Great. She was a prisoner in the house. To that. No. That was not what I was going to do. I was going to find a way to get a gas mask that didn't make me sick. So I researched gas masks, and I got a much better one from MSA, and I threw away the Wilson. And but that was all because of the 1988 article. I did get a lot of information from that article, and people were so much more. Now, I have to tell you that because we're being poisoned since 1775, there is a term called cheminosis, disease caused by chemicals, and the Royal Society of Scientists proved that and discovered that in 1775 in London, England. Charles II was behind that research. And look at us. Anyway, people were passing an immune system that was damaged to their children because they were being poisoned. So now they were getting more viruses and deadly infections than before. And so now we were on more drugs than before. And in the Roman Empire, they were famous for poisoning themselves, doing drugs and alcohol and binging. And they used hot springs and saunas to detox and clean themselves out so that they could do it again. I mean, so the Y in Collingwood offered to help me, and they gave me a free pass, and I went into the sauna to see if that would work, and I'm drinking, bottled water, not tap water. I'd been off tap. If I had tap water, I had to make sure I cooked it. And what I didn't realize that is when I was cooking with tap water, I was poisoning myself with the bleaches that were in it. But anyway, see, the Ministry of Environment didn't have that information to give me, or they would have, but they didn't have that information. So, it was such a long and slow process for me to find out what the heck was really going on. Because we were being so lied to, and the governments were covering everything up, and the doctors were trained not to know. Like, getting back to Dr. Boudra, this was a good, decent man. But he's not in charge of the Medical Association of Ontario or the Medical Association in Canada or the health organizations all over the world, right? So here's what you were up against. It's mind-boggling. Anyway, I go into the sauna, and I thought it might work. Well, I passed out, and they had to call an ambulance, and Dr. Cowan met me at the hospital, and he said, "Don't you try that again." And he put some ice packs on me and the cold trigger adrenaline, and he said, "You stick to that," and drinking buckets of coffee. And I'm not saying coffee's healthy, but it's what got me to my feet, and it's what allowed me to function enough so that I could get on the phone and continue with my research. And day after day, month after month, year after year, I was living a lot with starvation. No matter what I ate, I would take attacks, and I wouldn't know why. And then I'd choke on mucus and blood, and I'd go into convulsions. And then pain would shoot, and I'd be like electrocuted, and I would take a horrific, paralyzing attack. And I'd curl up like a ball, unable to sleep, and I'd meditate and take my mind into the universe, praying that God would send me someone to help me, someone to either help me save victims like me or let me die. Get me off this disgusting planet was my prayer. Now, I don't own the copyright of a picture of children, but they represent, and I hope the photographer will forgive me, because for everything I'm doing, it's free. I make no money off this. And I'm not trying to make money off this. I am dedicated to doing this for free, for as long as I live. And I see those children, and they're going to be living in a gas mask. And I don't mind telling you this. The next person who says to me, or I hear some idiot celebrity on TV say, everything happens for a reason and it's just not meant to be, you go stick it where the sun don't shine. Those children that will be born and have to live in a gas mask, it is not meant to be. It's because you are doing nothing about it. I should never have left Georgian Bay. I had thousands of people from every walk of life supporting me in my cause. But once again, my mother, she found me an apartment in Chelmsford, west of the smokestack of Inco, so that I'd be free from the sulfuric acid poisoning. And yes, I could walk in many places west of Sudbury. out in the wilderness, and I could safely cross-country ski again. So I had some good days. And every time I took an attack, I would purge myself and detoxify. And I had a brief recovery. Dan and Tom took turns taking me dancing. And you know what? For a little while, it was like paradise. Tom took me to a resort in Aurelia for a convention. Dan took me to Elliott Lake for a convention. So I have lovely moments in time. Dan says I'm very good at hanging on to the moments. And I had so much hope, you see. I was so full of hope. Anyway, I had a particularly good month. It was the spring, March, and 1989. And I went skiing, cross-country skiing out at Windy Lake. And I stopped in the coffee shop for my usual cup of coffee. And the OPP were there, and they said to me, "Don't you go out there. Mountain lions have been spotted." And I said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. I grew up on the farm," I said, "with my grandparents, and we don't have mountain lions." And they said, "Listen, we have mountain lions." Well, I wouldn't believe them. Well, what can I say? I was about a mile out in the wilderness, and a very large mountain lion with 2 cubs crossed my path. I froze in a ski stride position. She made a dead stop, and the cubs stopped in their tracks. Now, I happen to know and love cats. Don't forget, I had one for 12 years. Don't move is your only chance with a cat. It's not the same with a bear, but with a cat, move and they will attack. After about an eternity of me frozen in that position, having a wide peripheral vision, finally, that cat took off bouncing over a hill to my right with those 2 little cubs following. The graceful beauty of that cat leaping over a mound into the air was like a ballet dancer, only even more stunning to see. And I'm lucky to have lived to see it. And I will always cherish that memory, but not the terror that I felt. And I have an unusual ability, when terrified, do what I have to do. I don't react. I don't panic. I do what I have to do. And after she left, I stood frozen for a very long time to make sure that she wasn't going to come after me. Probably about a half an hour. And I got to my car and I drove all the way back to the coffee shop in kind of like a trance. And I got inside, and the minute I got inside, I just blubbered and broke down sobbing because the crisis was over and I could now release all that terror welled up inside of me. And the OPP were there again, and they said, "What the heck happened to you?" And I sputtered out the words, choking on sobs, and told them what happened. And they said, "We told you so." And I said, "Well, I was raised on the summers in my grandparents' farms, and I didn't have any mountain lions, so I didn't believe you." And I want to tell you, that was the end of my heading out by myself in the wilderness. I never did it again. Tom and Dan and Glenn became my dance partners, and I danced 5 days a week, and it was glorious. I was now very active in AA, Al-Anon, and Sister Bonnie helped me the most. My mother had damaged me the most with her insane attitude about, manipulating me in relationships with men that were abusive to me. And Sister Bonnie realized that the word love was warped in my brain by my mother. And so she said, "You change that word and you get rid of it. It doesn't exist. Use the word caring and ask yourself, do they care about me? Are they helping me get well? What are they doing for me?" And I want to tell you, this is how damaged I was. And I said to her, "Well, doesn't that mean I'm being selfish?" She said, "Oh, Trudi, you are so sick. That is not being selfish. That's being sane." And are they making you happy? And it took me a long time. And I want to tell you, I'm still not very good at it. I've never learned to care more about me than I do about others. I find that very difficult, which is why I was never able to abandon my mother. And she poisoned me too many times to count. And I got an article in the Sudbury in the Northern Life, and it was wonderful. But instead of getting the reaction I expected, they attacked me. More the women than the men. And this one woman was putting smoke bombs outside my window and by my apartment door, deliberately to poison me. And I became terminal again. After all that work. And I was dying. And I'm not going to go into the many times that my mother poisoned me and the time at the arena. I begged her, don't take me to the arena. And she insisted. And I got diesel fumes from the Zamboni machine. And 2 men carried me out and gave my mother such heck. They were so mad at her. They'd read the article. They knew that I didn't belong there. And I had a bubble gas mask sent to me by MSA. And that was in the article. And I had given talks in the jails and institutions. One story worth mentioning. He was about 9 years old. He was a drug pusher. Children's jail. Had bars, armed guards. It's a jail. He was so impressed by my story that I had once been a successful real estate investment consultant to millionaires. And he said, I make $1,000 a week. What kind of a career can I do to make that kind of money? And I laughed, saying, you better get yourself an education and in sales. A car salesman can make twice that without the risk of going to jail. And you can become a multimillionaire in real estate, for instance. And I said, it's also possible in the stock market, but it's also much more risky. And you have to be some kind of a genius. So I personally don't recommend that. So he promised me he'd go into real estate instead of drugs. Never heard from him again either. So I don't know what happened to him. But I'm hoping that he's a real estate agent. But that attack, that final attack, now I'm dying again. I knew I needed media to survive. So I sent out a picture of the bubble gas mask with a copy of the Sudbury Star article. Now, it was a really large article, but I got a phone call from one of the tabloids in Florida, and they desperately wanted the picture that Jim Brown took of me in the bubble gas mask equipment, and the managing editor refused. In my father's eyes, if I was not making money, I was not worth keeping alive. Upchan was that kind of sadistic monster. He contacted the editor and sabotaged me, telling her a pack of lies. And from that day on, I have been boycotted by the newspapers in Sudbury. And she would not give permission. And she wouldn't give me a copy of that beautiful photograph of me in the bubble mask that Jim Brown took of me. Well, what we did was we sent a copy of a copy. And they put out the article anyway. I gave up on searching for victims. It was clear they were everywhere. But most of them were housebound. How could they connect together? They lived in such isolation. Some lived out in the wilderness. Some lived out in Mount Sasha. Well, with the internet, I thought we could become connected, but The truth was they're just too sick to be connected. Fred Nelson tried that in the United States, and there's another group, Chemical Injury Network, that tried that, and it's not working. No, we need to be detoxified safely somehow so that we're functional enough that we can live in a sick, toxic society without taking these attacks and without dying. And that was my goal. The tabloid was amazing. What I was able to do with these articles was I was able to get better gas mask equipment with the help of the American Steelworkers Union for the men in the mines, the firemen, and the military. But I was never able to get medical, legal, sane treatment. So my cousin, 9 years old, took one attack. Doctors gave him antibiotics and sent him home. The next morning he was found dead on the bedroom floor. The press release that I sent out to the United States got me the bubble gas mask, and in the bubble gas mask, and it was because it helped. I could be seen, in a gas mask that's rubber with big filters. People wouldn't talk to me, and I received a phone call that they could help me if I could get to New York. That there was a drug on the black market for $40,000 if I could get the money, and I knew somebody that could help me get that kind of money. So arrangements were made to get me to New York. Special arrangements through the travel agency that I was a bubble person. There'd been a couple of articles on children that were bubble people, immune deficient like me. So, and what's funny is you don't hear much about them anymore because nobody's talking about them, but they do exist. And he said to me that this amphetamine, Obitrol, would completely reverse the brain damage, which is what I was looking for, a way to make a person functional. Now, a call came from Vermont, a military man retired who wanted to take me into his home and take care of me for the rest of my life. And I said to him, as lovely as that sounds, and as tempting as it is, I had to finish my research. I needed to get to New York. So that's where I'm going to leave you with. I got on the plane and I flew to New York. They carried me on the plane and they carried me off. And that 5 days in New York, it's worth a movie in itself because it was something else. And I have witnesses that are still alive because they were half my age. And I'll leave it there. This is May 4th, approximately, 1989. What you hear in the background, this is the end of chapter 2, is Greta, and I'm just sickened by the bashing that she's getting. But I'm finding it very difficult to finish this. But I'm going to upload, and it's in silence. I'm sorry, I can't give you music. The rest of the photographs that contain all the research that I would later discover, much later. But I'm going to put it here because it was known at this time in 1989. It was known in 1933, only I didn't know about it. So I'm going to put it here because my final chapter, I'm going to skip an awful lot of the research because people just don't care. And it can easily be found, if not by me, by somebody else. And so I just wanted to explain that there's going to be silence from here on in. And I will have the pictures of the research that I did.